So thank you for joining us today, Sean, on behalf of myself and MICAS for the In Conversation series. It's really kind of you. It's a real privilege and a pleasure to have you join us.
Well, the last time I saw you was in Loquacious, Leeds, and that was a very nice interview that we did. I thought.
Yes, at Yorkshire.
Wasn't it?
Yeah, Yorkshire Sculpture Park.
It was wonderful. I thought our talk was very nice. I remember it.
And you gave me, I remember,
down on the park. Huh?
Yeah, and you gave me a wonderful bear hug at the end.
I know. That was before Corona.
Yes, absolutely.
Now I would only be able to give you a photograph of the bear hug.
Yes, absolutely. So the nature of the interview is to discuss space and its influence and effect and interference, in a sense, on your work, and the wonderful kind of beginning, I thought, would be to talk about loading a truck. The text, because you talk in there about negative and positive space, and about unremitting labor to arrive at positive space.
It's a great way to start. I was asked, about the importance of sculpture in relation to painting, because sculpture is always a thing, and a painting has to be brought from an image into being a thing psychologically. And I said, there's a lot more to sculpture than the history of art. As you have rightly pointed out, my sculpture comes out of labor and my experiences of working very hard as a teenager, because I come from extreme poverty. And there's the baling machine, which is the same kind of thing, because you're taking what is, in fact, a box with air in it. Which is a title I took from Seamus Heaney. I saw an astounding crate full of air.
Wow.
And when I read that line, I was weeping. It was so beautiful. Because the idea of emptiness in the Zen sense doesn't exist. And which is very contemporary, because emptiness doesn't exist. And you're taking this thing that's full of air, you're flattening it, and you're compressing it in a baling machine. So when I worked in Woolworths, this was before the cardboard factory. I used to take all the cardboard boxes from the store when they were empty, and bring them out back and flatten them and put them in this box, which I would crank down. Whenever you're in a port, you always see these beautiful bales that look like Sean Scully sculptures, because they look like rough minimalism. Or minimalism humanized. So it's kind of like, almost like a tangly sculpture. It was very kinetic. And actual, and of course, material. So you have the trees, which I have now surrounded. I own 1,500 trees.
Oh, wow.
Because I'm a big environmentalist. And one tree can support you and I for a year. It makes enough oxygen for you and I for a year. So trees are life. So you have these trees, they're cut down and they're turned into cardboard boxes. The cardboard boxes find their way into the cardboard factory, and there's these 4 young guys handling all these cardboard boxes, and they're going down the chutes. And after they're sorted, which is incredibly labor intensive and inefficient,
yes,
a huge truck pulls up. And we have to fill it again. So all this transportation, you have to imagine the amount of expansion and contraction that goes on in our world.
yes,
You know, you're opening these boxes and you're filling them with stuff that are also boxes
yes,
or cans. And then you flatten them. And then you bring them back to another place where they're shot up a giant chute. And then they're sorted and then shot down smaller chutes.
yeah.
And then they're put back in a truck. The whole thing is mad when you think of it.
You must have had a real understanding of space in a really incredible physical way from that moment on.
Well, I did. Also, the baling machine before, when I was 15, made a huge impression on me. I absolutely adored it. Because when you opened the gate of the baling machine, the bale would fall out and you'd make the sculpture. And just like Sean Scully paintings, they're all the same and they're all different.
Yes.
Just like us.
Yes.
We're all the same and we're all different.
Yeah.
And that's when my education really as a sculptor and a contemporary artist began, I think, way before art school. Because when I went to art school, I was confirmed. You know, when I went to art school, I was a zealot.
Yes.
I was so grateful to be at art school, you know, having lived the life I'd lived. But anyway, so they come down and then we had this very beautiful long van truck.
Yes, you talk about that, of the negative, the depth of
the negative space, which of course I in a sense used inside Opulent Ascension in Venice. You know, this idea of this illuminated interior negative space was something I probably got from looking at that truck, because I was always very observant, always trying to, in a sense, educate myself. And there's all kinds of education, of course, you know, not just at university, of course. And the inside of this truck was a little illuminated because the top, I remember, was made of fiberglass. So it let light in. And it was and on this occasion, we did other trucks too, but on this occasion, it was a beautiful sunny day. And it was a Sunday, actually. And
you remember.
Yeah, and we looked at this van, which was pretty clean. It had been swept out, and there it was. It's like, there's all the cardboard boxes, thousands of them, and there's the empty space. And the empty space was massive.
Yes.
You could live in it easily.
Yes.
It was the size of an apartment.
Yeah.
And we began to put them in the corner, you know, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And you'd make a column, and the column would start to grow. And the negative space would get a notch out of it.
Yes.
And of course, this is very similar to what I make now with the sculptures.
Yeah.
You know, I just stack things.
Yeah.
It's the most natural thing for me to do.
Yeah.
And of course, in a sense, that's what I do in my paintings too.
Yes.
And in my paintings, I don't paint space. I used to. And at a certain point, I stopped painting space. This was long after my important trip to Morocco. But the idea of filling in space with material has its origins in my adolescence. Now, when I was a boy, I was like a little Beau Brummel. You know, I used to wear stiff collars with studs back and front.
Wow.
And I dressed incredibly.
Yes.
I mean, everything about me was aesthetic.
Yes.
And this was at the same time as working the baling machine, working in the cardboard factory. Yeah, I did all this rough work, but I also dressed beautifully.
Yes.
Well, I wanted to impress the girls, of course.
Yes, of course. And I think in that moment, if I think of your paintings at that time in the 60s, I think of the figures. There's a figure in a room, 1967.
Yes.
And they're very, at the same, whilst I'm reading about you, I'm also reading a book on Henri Matisse and Pablo Picasso in Paris in 1900. And I think of the birth of Fauvism and the rise with Duran and Matisse. And I thought of that with those works. Did you have those same sensations?
Yeah, and also I have to say that my models are not really American. My models are Picasso and Matisse in particular.
Yes.
Because Picasso and Matisse mastered all different mediums.
Yes.
And that's what I've done, which is very unusual now.
Yes, yes, yes.
You know, I make sculpture, photography, drawing, watercolor, pastel. I'm a great printer, of course, because I was working on Heidelberg presses when I was 15.
Yes, yes.
So
yes.
I know how to do all this stuff. And if you look at, you know, those two, they would go from medium to medium.
Yes.
And this is very unusual in America. You see this in the work of my, you know, one of my absolute favorite artists, Cy Twombly.
Yes, yes.
Cy Twombly spent half of his life in Europe, you know, as an Italian prince. And he made all these sculptures as a result, because the European model is a model of flexibility. In fact, the other day I wrote a very short poem, which was that in America, I'll start again, which was that in European art, there are many maybes. And in American art, there's only yes and no. American art is very much about a kind of monolithic point of view.
Yes.
And European art is so much more flexible, even though what I do is very insistent. You know, it has a lot to do with minimalism and repetition, or primitive repetition, you might even say.
Yes.
Or labor repetition. The kind of repetition that Charlie Chaplin was making fun of in his movie Modern Times.
Yes.
You know, the way that the human being can't keep up with the repetition. Well, in my case, I'm the one who's making the repetition. I've reversed the order. But, you know, I have a relationship, of course, with Philip Glass's music. But then as time went by, I think I became more similar musically to Max Richter, who lives in London, who's taken minimalism and humanized it and brought it back into the world of melody. And that's kind of what I've done in my work. I mean, basically in my work, to say it simple, I took minimalism and I brought it back to something that existed before minimalism. Or as Arthur Danto said, I brought abstract expressionism into the contemporary world, which is another way of putting it.
I remember when we interviewed before, you talked about how you humanized abstract minimalism and abstraction. You brought, I mean, we talked about Donald Judd and Ad Reinhard and how that kind of art, it arrives at a very kind of mechanical endpoint in a sense, and it's something you weren't approving of, and so your work takes the emotion again, introduces emotion.
Yeah, well, I introduced relationships.
Yeah.
I started putting things together which were very influenced by sculpture, of course. The paintings that I made in the early 80s. I started banging things together, and Joe Mashek, an art critic of the day, called them car crashes, where you'd put two panels together that didn't fit. And another person who wrote on them, Lynn Cook, said they were like power relationships that reflected very well what was going on in society with the rise of minorities and women, which I have in fact enjoyed. I don't consider myself to be particularly pure.
Yes.
I always consider myself to be made out of, 98% dirt. I'm very comfortable in the, dirt of the world, let's say.
Yes. And when I look at the paintings from the 70s into the 80s and into the 90s, I really see in the beginning a kind of rigidity, a definite pattern upon pattern approach.
Yes.
The lack of space, if you like, and then a looseness emerge where it's more emotional. And is that the sense that you were kind of leading towards?
Well, I think it took me a long time to make myself, because I come from, I've thought about this a lot lately. I've come from such rigidity. I would cross London every day. I started work when I was 15. I went into this Victorian atmosphere, really, where you were given to a man. You were his boy, and you were an apprentice, and you had to typeset. And it's so labor intensive, so disciplined, and mind numbing. And then we'd unload all the lead off of the trucks, get lead poisoning. And we'd clock in and clock out, clock in, clock out, clock in, clock out, like that every day, always on the same train. And this requires an extraordinary amount of discipline, which I had.
Yes.
And which has stood me in good stead. And however, to get to something deeper, humanistic, poetic, of course, that took a long time to come out from inside the wall, because it was walled in.
Yes.
And in the beginning, I went to Morocco, when I was at Newcastle, and it just blew my mind. And I loved all the patterns. Of course, I didn't realize that the patterns were all in the cause of a kind of dominating authority that just kept repeating, Allah is great, 500,000 million times. And it was meant to crowd out free thought.
Yes.
That's what all the decorations are. That's what all the walls are. There's no space in Islam for, let's say, romantic, self-indulgent thinking. It's all devotional.
Yes.
So the wallpaper, even the wallpaper carries messages. It's not like William Morris that's just showing you the willow tree pattern.
Yes.
And out of that, I somehow had to bring that rigor into the world of humanistic painting. So I basically had to combine that with Manet. Easier said than done.
Yeah, but you really, when you look at the paintings, there's a year on year, there's a slight change. It's a tiny change. It's like and I guess they're biographical. They're really about you and that rigidity that you're trying to let go of, and it takes a long time to do so.
Well, it took a long time to put it in.
Yes, yeah.
So it took a long time to get it out.
Yes.
However, it gave my work, whilst it limited it, you know, we have talked about Ad Reinhardt.
Yes.
Whilst it limited it, it also gave it a great strength, you know, because it allowed me to go to New York.
But it's interesting because something that we talked about before is that you stayed in New York, even though it was so difficult. You seem to not enjoy. That's clearly not the word, but you're able to deal with the environment that you're in and persevere and continue.
Yeah, I often think of it as a personality defect.
Yes.
I mean, I'm not sure that's a compliment.
Yes.
That a person would have the necessary attributes to remain in a hostile situation, like New York. And I wonder, you know, why one would want to do that anyway, because it seems to be against life, because you're kind of pushing against something that's pushing against you. A friend of mine says that I have the ability to convert negative energy into positive energy, that I take it and use it in some sort of converter.
Yes.
And put it out as positive energy.
Yes. It does feel like that with your paintings. There's a kind of an incredible beauty to the works when they take on that looseness, when they take on the emotional and the...
In my work, there is a kind of longing to deal, I suppose, with the brutality of our world and its structures, and to convert those structures into something that is handleable for a human. There's a lot of soul in my work, a lot of empathy. And that accounts for the way it's painted and the beauty. There's always this sense of trying to convert something into something else. Whereas in America, things are put down and left like that.
Yes.
And I was looking last night at a movie, The Night of the Generals, which is a movie about the Nazis, of course. And they had these gates at that time that were decorated with diagonal stripes that went up and down. And they looked remarkably similar to Frank Stella's paintings.
Oh, wow.
This isn't a criticism of Frank Stella, it's just to say that there's a bluntness to it, you know. There's a non-negotiating bluntness, because Nazism or fascism is always something that is unwilling to negotiate, because it's an extreme situation. And all the symbols are extreme and painted flat with no nuance. And my work is all nuance, of course. So I take in what is in effect the same kind of language that has a relationship and on some occasions with Frank Stella, who I think of as an extremely important artist, but of a different generation. You know, he's more of a believer in formalism, and I'm a great doubter of formalism and also of any kind of authority. My work is fundamentally subversive, but I wanted to do something that was contemporary, that was more in the rhythm of the world, you know, that I felt the world needed more, you know, not be part of this School of London bubble. Yes. Because it was hermetic. And I always think globally. So I wanted to take it on, but when I took it on, I'm talking about, I suppose, abstraction and minimalism. But when I took it on, I realized that it was very hard. And then my job was to convert it to humanism. And that is basically what I've added.
And can we talk about your sculptures as well? Because I think of the monumental pieces I saw in Yorkshire and also at Chateau Lacoste, and how you've translated that sense of space from painting into sculpture.
Since I had worked the baling machine, and since I'd worked in the cardboard factory, there it was. There's the answer. I already had everything I needed to make the sculptures. So when I decided to make sculptures, it was the most natural thing in the world for me. And you know why I make sculptures?
No,
it's because I bought this studio, and it had 5 acres of land. So I thought, well, it's got 5 acres of land, and I am basically a space filler. You give me a space, I'll fill it. And, you know, I've had friendships with artists. I had a wonderful relationship with Robert Ryman.
Wow, okay.
In fact, Robert Ryman, I believe, art historically, is in fact the link between Abex and me.
Yes.
Because Robert Ryman, who's, I believe, hugely important, didn't make images. He made painting. He concentrated on the painting, almost to the exclusion of the image. His images are very hard to decipher as images, but they're more connected to the idea of action and making a surface.
Yes.
So if you think about his minimalism or post-minimalism and the surfaces on his paintings, which are ravishing, and then you get to my paintings, there you can see that a torch has been handed over.
Yes.
And he was a huge supporter of me. I mean, he tried to help me a lot when I was in New York, you know, kind of took me on.
Yes.
And I learned a lot from him as an artist. And he learned nothing from me, but I did teach him how to play pool.
Right.
He had a pool table in his basement.
I see.
And he wanted someone to show him how to shoot pool. So I showed him.
Right.
So that was sweet.
Wow. And
in a city that's not very sweet.
Yes, yes, of course. And a question to give us context for why we're here, in terms of MICAS, the new institution in Malta, which will be opening in 2022. Obviously, you're not having seen the space, but if I give you a picture of it, it's a 17th century citadel up on a mound, if you like, with the sea surrounding it, and within that, there will be contemporary spaces within the matrix of spaces that are there. And I want to get, as an audience, we want to understand your opinion of such buildings when you have the historical and the contemporary, and your impression, your understanding, your contribution, in a sense, to something like that.
Well, of course, as you very well know, Spain, and to a lesser extent, Italy, are full of spaces like that.
Yes, yes.
Particularly Spain, where they have a great sense of design and architecture. And they take a lot of very ancient buildings and they contemporize them. Yeah, you have these beautiful interventions, and I think it's fantastic. I love it. What you don't want is a compromise. You know, like around here, all the houses, the new houses, are suburbanized. You know, they're built in the old style.
Yes.
So if you have stone up against metal and glass, which is what we work with, it looks fantastic.
Yes, yes, yes.
I mean, I love that combination. And in Köln, you know, there's the church by Zumthor, Peter Zumthor, Swiss architect. You know, I've only seen it from the outside. It looks absolutely wonderful, with this very great respect for materials and glass and the advantages and disadvantages of these periods. I mean, the disadvantages, of course, of stone is that it doesn't emit very much light. But the disadvantage of contemporary architecture is that it's temporary. The really old buildings, like let's say Rouen Cathedral, stand forever, or Durham Cathedral. You know, these are incredible places. So I think these juxtapositions is what you want, where one reveres the other.
And you think that contemporary art in a space like that really works?
Really it's beautiful.
Yeah.
I've shown in Alhambra.
Yeah. Wow.
Which is a Moorish building. You know, it's 800 years old. No, I think they look wonderful. But that's what we have in Europe that doesn't exist in America. I don't think you have to knock a building down.
Yes.
You know, I once showed in a place in Trento, in the castle, you know, Il Castillo di Trento, and I had a big painting in a stone room next to a tapires. It looked fantastic.
Wow. Incredible.
On a stone wall.
Yes.
It looked great.
Yeah.
So I think that you want to use the advantages of both. That's what it is.
Yes. Yes.
There's also a building, private museum being built in Valencia, in a palace that they're doing right now. I've been to see it.
Oh wow!
Because they're making a little room for me.
Oh, wonderful.
With stained glass windows and a painting and a bench that you can sit down, look at the painting. So, what you want is not a collision. but a kind of loving relationship between what each can bring.
Yes. Yeah.
And the solidity of the ancient architecture is something very beautiful. And that's what I try, in a sense, to imitate in those stone sculptures. You know, I want them there in 4,000 years.
And they do have that permanence about them. They do have that strength about them.
The problem with contemporary architecture is it has no mystery in it. You know, it's all really out there. And the advantage of all those buildings is that they have this kind of mysterious sense of materiality, because the walls are 3 foot thick.
Yes.
And Malta, I've never been, but I know it was extremely important historically, as a massive importance historically during the war, and of course the Templar, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sean, for your time.
It's a pleasure.
I wish we could talk for longer, but I think I might drive everyone crazy. But thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.
And for me, it's very nice to see you again.